They said the sun would never set on the British Empire. But in the burning heat of the Indian plains, as flags trembled and whispers of rebellion rose, the sun began to fade. For nearly 2 centuries, Britain ruled the Indian subcontinent. An empire built on power, ambition, and illusion. Yet by 1947 it was gone. Not defeated in battle, but undone by its own contradictions, by the very people it sought to control. Welcome to Echoes of Empire, where we bring the forgotten stories of Britain's past back to life. This is not just the story of the British Raj, it is the story of its fall, of how an empire of steel and silk collapsed under the weight of its own glory. India, the jewel in the crown. A land of 1,000 kingdoms, languages, and faiths, united not by consent, but by conquest. After the Battle of Plassey in 1757, the British East India Company, a trading corporation, became the ruler of millions. For nearly a century, merchants acted as monarchs. They built armies, minted coins, collected taxes. Behind the facade of trade, they governed with iron precision, enriching Britain while draining India's wealth. But the British called it civilization. Railways, schools, and law, the gifts of empire. Yet for every mile of track laid, another village starved. For every English school built, another Indian tongue was silenced. The Raj was not just rule. It was a hierarchy, where the rulers dined in marble halls, and the ruled built them. In 1857, the illusion shattered. It began with a rumor that rifle cartridges were greased with pig and cow fat, an insult to Hindu and Muslim soldiers alike. But beneath that spark lay a century of humiliation and hunger. The sepoys of Meerut rose in rebellion, and within weeks, flames of revolt spread across North India. Delhi, Lucknow, Kanpur, cities turned into battlegrounds. For the first time, the empire trembled. The British called it the Mutiny. Indians called it the First War of Independence. The truth lies somewhere between. A storm of vengeance and chaos that scarred both sides. When it ended, Britain's response was merciless. Villages were razed, rebels executed, rivers ran red. The East India Company was dissolved, and Queen Victoria took the throne as Empress of India. The Raj was reborn, not weaker, but colder. The lesson of 1857 was clear. Fear would rule where loyalty could not. The late 19th century was the age of imperial confidence. The British Raj became the crown jewel of global power. Viceroys governed from palaces, parades marched through marble streets, and Queen Victoria's name echoed from Karachi to Calcutta. Railways connected the vast land. The telegraph carried orders from London in minutes, and the Union Jack fluttered over 1/5 of humanity. But beneath the pomp lay cracks. Famines ravaged millions, victims of policies that prized profit over people. The wealth of India filled Britain's banks, yet its people lived and died in poverty. Writers like Kipling glorified the empire's burden. But in the bazaars and villages, another voice was rising, the quiet, steady murmur of awakening. At the turn of the 20th century, India began to stir. Western education, the empire's proudest gift, became its undoing. A new generation of Indians read the same ideals Britain claimed to cherish: liberty, justice, and self-rule. The Indian National Congress was born, at first loyal, polite, seeking reform. But as decades passed, hope turned to frustration. The partition of Bengal in 1905, a divide-and-rule strategy, lit a fire that would never die. And then came a man who spoke softly, yet shook the empire. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Armed not with guns but with faith, he preached ahimsa, non-violence, as a weapon stronger than armies. His salt marches, his fasts, his defiance, they pierced the conscience of an empire. Churchill called him a half-naked fakir. But that fakir was dismantling 2 centuries of British rule. One peaceful protest at a time. The Second World War changed everything. Britain, once the world's master, found itself fighting for survival. India's resources and soldiers were pulled into the war effort, without consent. Famine struck Bengal in 1943. 3 million died while ships carried rice away for the war. The empire's mask of benevolence cracked beyond repair. Meanwhile, in Europe, Britain fought for freedom, while denying it in Asia. The hypocrisy was impossible to ignore. When the war ended in 1945, Britain was exhausted, bankrupt and divided. Across the world, empires were falling. And in India, the demand for independence had become unstoppable. By 1946, the British knew the Raj was dying. The question was not if, but how. Lord Mountbatten, the last viceroy, arrived with orders to leave. But the empire's exit was rushed, careless, chaotic. The map was cut with trembling hands, dividing India and Pakistan in a single stroke. As borders were drawn, bloodlines were erased. Neighbors turned on neighbors. Trains full of refugees crossed the new frontier. Some arrived empty. Over 1 million died in the partition's violence, the greatest migration in human history. The empire's last act was its most tragic. On August 15, 1947, the Union Jack was lowered. The air that once carried the anthem of empire now echoed with freedom's cry. India was independent, and the British Raj was no more. The fall of the Raj was not just the end of rule, it was the end of an age. The British Empire, once proud and invincible, began to crumble piece by piece. Burma, Ceylon, Africa. The tide of freedom swept across the world. In London, statues still stood, medals still shone, but the empire was gone. What remained was memory, of roads and railways, of scars and stories. For Britain, it was a reckoning. For India, a rebirth. Yet both nations remain bound, by history, by language, by echoes of an empire that shaped them both. So how did the British Raj fall? Not through invasion, but through awakening. The triumph of people over power, of conscience over conquest. Empires rise through steel and fire, but they fall through truth. This was Echoes of Empire. Subscribe for more untold stories from the heart of Britain's history.